So, welcome everyone. I'm not covering myself with glory here. I'm not entirely sure that Shane is going to ask me to deputise for him again, given that this is being recorded. Anyway, but very much like to welcome Dawn and Matt. Now, the most important part of this task is to ensure that because this is a Linux Foundation event, I display the antitrust policy notice, which hopefully you can see at the moment. So if all participants can kindly review that. If you have any questions and you are a member of the Linux Foundation, then feel free to get in touch with Andy Updegrove at Gesma Updegrove. If you're not, then please speak to your local legal counsel, who will be able to tell you what this means. So, without any further ado, again, welcome everyone. So I'm delighted to welcome Dawn Foster and Matt German-Prey. I'm always interested to hear what the CHAOSS project has been up to. I'm not going to steal any of their thunder by trying to give a synopsis of what they do, because we're about to hear about that. But the only thing I will say is that I am extremely impressed with their work, and I'm sort of very keen to get further involved in it as well. So Matt and Dawn, if I can hand over to you, and that now I will see whether I can stop sharing, and hopefully it will work for you. And indeed it does. You're much better at this than I am, so thank you.
And you see it as full screen now, I assume.
Looks great.
Okay,
yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thanks, Andrew. Dawn and I are here. We're going to give you just a bit of overview on the CHAOSS project, tiny bit of where we started, and more importantly, we're going to kind of move into what we're working on now and what the future might hold just a little bit. So as Andrew pointed out, I'm Matt German-Prey. I'm one of the co-founders of the CHAOSS project. I'm also a professor by day at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. I've been involved in open source for quite a while, probably about 12 or 15 years. My first project that I really got involved with was the Fossology project, license scanning project, which is now at the Linux Foundation. It was largely run by Hewlett Packard at the time when I joined that project. I'm also a contributor to the SPDX spec, so I've been part of that community for a long time, particularly when it first got going. And like I said, now I'm spend most of my time in the CHAOSS project, most meaning all of my time in the CHAOSS project. So I'll turn it over to Dawn so she can give just a brief overview of herself, and then we'll continue on.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Dawn Foster. I am currently the director of data science at the CHAOSS project. I'm also on the board, and I run a few of the working groups. I've been working in open source for 25 plus years. So I've been doing this for quite a long time. I actually worked in Intel's very first open source program office, which was somewhere in the early 2000s-ish. And I've worked in lots of OSPOs, and I've been in various director of community roles, and I also went back to school and got a PhD, and I studied the Linux kernel. So I looked at how people collaborate together within the kernel community using mailing lists. So I've done just a little bit of everything, and have been working in open source for quite a long time. And metrics has been a part of a lot of my work in the past. So this was a natural fit for me to start focusing a little more on the CHAOSS project. So that's it for me. I'll turn it back over to Matt.
Thanks, Dawn. All right, so this is the super brief history of the CHAOSS project. We started, gosh, it's been years now, many years. We were the 59th project at the Linux Foundation, which, for those of you that keep track of the number of projects at the Linux Foundation, it's well beyond 59 at this point. I think it might be near 1,000, if not over 1,000. So the project actually started as a birds of a feather session at one of the member summits. I think back in the day, it was the collaboration summit. And we had just put a kind of a sign on one of the birds of a feather board asking if companies had an interest in the health and sustainability of the projects that they rely on. And we really didn't actually think many people were going to show up. But I think probably 60 people showed up. And by the time we got through introductions of everybody, the birds of a feather session was over. So we really didn't talk about health and sustainability much. It was mostly just about meeting people. Had a chance to talk with Mike Dolan and Kate Stewart at the Linux Foundation about the interest. There was some alignment with a company called Bitergia, who had a piece of software, Grimoire Lab. And a lot of things aligned to the point where we started the project, the Linux Foundation. And our focus has really been on health and sustainability of projects. And this can come in a variety of different forms. So there are times when an organization is going to care about the health and sustainability of the upstream projects that they depend on. There are other times where organizations are going to care about the health and sustainability of the projects that they themselves are managing. So perhaps former internal intellectual property that they want to move out to the open, and they care about how they're managing and understanding the health and sustainability of the projects they care about. I think that's kind of where we started with the project. It's evolved quite a bit since, and I'll talk a little bit about that right now. So our current efforts, we have largely been focusing on the development of metrics and metrics models. And so from the link there, you'll be able to get to somewhere in the neighborhood of 90 metrics and probably about a dozen metrics models. These, what we publish, are really just standards in the sense of they're documented standards of how we would understand a particular metric. And so a real classic example of a metric that I tell people is, say, like age of an issue. So you may want to understand how old all of your issues are within your project or the projects that you care about. Then we have taken the time to define what that is, how we understand issue age, and how one might go about collecting information to better understand the age of the issues. So again, we have like 90 different metrics to which age of an issue is really just one example. Some of the metrics can be derived from trace data. So electronic trace data, meaning that data comes from, say, GitHub repositories or different communication channels. Other metrics are more qualitative in nature, so they may require you actually talking to community members. So for example, one of our metrics is project burnout. How much are the people in your project burning out on the amount of work they're doing with respect to the project? Well, that's a tricky metric to understand from, say, issues or pull request trace data. So we have a series of interview questions that you can do to try to understand burnout within your project as well. So the metrics come in both quantitative and qualitative structures. The metrics models are collections of metrics. So what we had found over the years is that any individual metric may or may not be useful by itself. So, but there may be times where a collection of metrics brought together have kind of a more collective meaning. One that maybe some of you have seen is Project Velocity. This was one that was developed at the CNCF years ago that draws together a variety of different metrics to understand the velocity of an open source project. So models can kind of come in that way as well. The metrics themselves are, again, just documents. We also have several pieces of software that are part of the CHAOSS project. We have Augur, we have Grimoire Lab, and we also have Cricket. And each one of these pieces of software is essentially working to deploy these metrics and metrics models so that you can actually see the data that you're trying to understand. And we do a lot of community building work as well. So we're global community, we have CHAOSS Africa, we have CHAOSS Asia Pacific. We've looked at communities in Latin America and the Balkans as well. We have a lot of representation in Europe, a lot of representation in North America. So we're constantly working on doing community development efforts to really foster inclusiveness in the CHAOSS project. I think at the latest, I'm not sure how great of a metric this is, but the latest is we have 3,000 members in Slack that are active, that are at least counted as Slack active. And I'm not sure how great of a metric that is. We would need to do a little bit more digging, but just to kind of give you an idea of the size of the community. In fact, right now, CHAOSScon Africa is happening in Lagos, Nigeria, to which I think Brian Prophet is doing one of the keynotes from Red Hat. So it's really been a great community effort. So this is when we talk about the metrics, this will give you an idea of kind of what I'm referring to. So we have, if you go to our website, you'll see kind of across the top, we have the About Calendar Community Metrics. And clicking on the metrics link will take you to this list of all of our metrics. We categorize them as well, but here's just a sense of what all of our metrics are. Clicking on each one of them will take you to the definition, which is, say, time to first response is the metric, to which we have community developed each one of these definitions, to which you can know more. You can take a look at how you might want to deploy these metrics, just to kind of give you a better understanding of what each one of these metrics is. So the site is pretty well laid out with respect to providing this information. More recently, what we've been finding is that we can develop a lot of metrics and a lot of metrics models and software, but simply putting them out there, it's really not, if you build it, they will come. We have to help people understand these metrics in practice. So each metric can kind of mean something different to different people. So there is no perfect metric that will mean everything to everyone, all the same. So we've really been focusing, I'd say, in the last 2 years on helping people understand the metrics that are meaningful to them in practice. So again, just providing 90 metrics, great, provides a definition, but understanding those 90 metrics and how you might combine them to be important for you within your industry and within your organization really takes some time and effort. We'll talk a little bit about that. So for our groups in practice, I'd say again, the last 2 years, we've been focusing on how the CHAOSS metrics and software can be used in a variety of different settings. Perhaps being a Linux Foundation project and kind of where we started, I'd say the corporate OSPO was really one of the first areas where we were considering metrics in practice. To me, that was always kind of where my mindset was with the corporate OSPO. As Dawn pointed out, Dawn is now Director of Data Science at the CHAOSS project. Dawn joined us from the VMware OSPO. So like there was kind of this connection that had always been part of the CHAOSS project. So over the last 2 years, what we've really come to understand is universities now are also developing their own OSPOs. So as faculty get grants and develop software and try to build community around that software, they themselves need support in how they understand licensing and compliance, how they understand community development, how they understand connections with upstream projects. But naturally, the way that the metrics are used in the university or academic setting is going to be quite different than the way that metrics and practices are used in a corporate setting. The deliverables are just different. The way that reviews are done are just different. They're very different contexts, and the way that you would engage metrics is naturally going to be different as well. The rest kind of lists some others. So the United Nations has an interest in metrics at a global scale. Scientific and research open source may have some overlap with academic, but there are large scientific institutions that are not necessarily connected to universities, say, for example, national labs, that are also doing similar open source work and would like to understand the impact that their projects are making. Funding agencies, so there are quite a number of agencies that fund open source work, say, for example, in the healthcare side of things, where they're funding open source projects to develop software and technologies that can improve healthcare for people. They want to understand the impact of their funding. Government agencies have a big interest in open source. Some of you may know Remy DeCosmaker, who is at the US federal government, who has done a lot of work in terms of how the US government is understanding open source as part of their deliverables. And then we have one that's nascent, which is taking a look at ISO standardization right now, and how we might think about the metrics and metrics models as being part of a global standard. I know that OpenChain has done a lot of ISO work. It's extremely complicated. It takes a long time. So this is very nascent and very early. So I'm going to turn it over to, I believe I'm turning it over to Dawn now to talk a little bit more about some of the work that she's been doing around CHAOSS practitioner guides. Dawn?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Matt. So, as Matt mentioned, historically within the CHAOSS project, we focused on metrics definitions, metrics models, along with software like Augur and Grimoire Lab that allow you to collect and then visualize those metrics. And historically, we've also had a heavier focus in the past on contribution metrics, which tend to be used by community managers, who are some of the early CHAOSS users, and others who want to find ways to improve their open source projects from within. But lately, we've also expanded into consumption metrics to help OSPOs and others understand the viability of open source projects that they're consuming. And the viability metrics models were actually developed by Gary White at Verizon. But a big part of using data is figuring out what questions you have and how you can take the tsunami of data that's available for open source projects and then figure out which metrics can help you turn it into something meaningful, which is where the practitioner guides come in. So we know that people get overwhelmed by the data. So we created a new practitioner guide series. Each one is focused on a single topic, but the real value of these guides isn't actually on the data or the metrics, despite being under the CHAOSS project. The real value is in how you make meaningful improvements to your open source projects. And each guide has really tangible actions that you might want to take to improve the area covered in the guide. If you want to go to the next slide. So I do want to just remind people, I was here at the OpenChain webinar in December, where I talked in detail about the practitioner guides, including responsiveness, contributor sustainability, organizational participation, security. So I'm not going to cover those again here. So if you missed it or want a refresher, I encourage you to go back. I've included the link right here. Go back and watch that webinar to learn more about those original 5 guides. So I am also happy to report that as we promised, we indeed have more guides now than we did when I was here in December. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about the new guides, which cover diverse leadership, sunsetting, and sunsetting, which is archiving open source projects, and demonstrating organizational value. So yeah, thanks. So, without diverse leadership, underrepresented groups can often face challenges in participating and contributing to projects. And then those projects lose valuable talent and ideas. So, diverse leadership enhances the decision-making processes by incorporating various viewpoints and experiences, leading to better problem solving and more effective projects. It promotes a culture of inclusion and respect, improving morale and engagement among community members, and ultimately contributing to projects' long-term success and sustainability. The diversity of your open source project leadership directly impacts your ability to build a diverse community as a whole, since new and existing contributors feel more included when there are other people in leadership positions who are like them in some way. So this guide is a bit different than the ones I covered in the December webinar. So responsiveness, contributor sustainability, organizational participation, and security can all be measured using what we refer to as trace data, or data that can be easily gathered in an automated way from your open source repositories or other community platforms. However, measuring diversity and inclusion is a bit more complex and can't be easily automated. It can be difficult to track and gather this data because of privacy concerns, right? And the risks associated with storing personally identifiable and sensitive data. So rather than trying to gather data directly from the people in your community to determine leadership diversity, we actually recommend using community perception surveys to ask the broader community how they feel about the diversity of leadership within the project. And there are several ways to improve the diversity of your leadership that are covered in this guide. One good first step is in creating and communicating clear pathways for contributors to grow into leadership roles, which may include creating sponsorship opportunities and having a transparent criteria for leadership positions. And in this case, sponsorship doesn't refer to financial sponsorship or financial contributions. Sponsorship here considers community members who receive support, where a sponsor within or even outside the community uses their personal reputation to create opportunities for these sponsored people to advance in a project. It can also help to specifically invite people who represent a variety of backgrounds that aren't already well represented in your community or within your leadership. You can move to the next slide. Open source projects, even widely used ones, can become abandoned or just no longer maintained for a wide variety of reasons. And it's important to remember that not every open source project can or even should exist forever. So technologies evolve, corporate priorities change, people's interests change. But what you don't want are abandoned open source projects with security vulnerabilities sitting in your source code repositories where someone might trust that project simply because they trust you or your organization. Finding inactive projects and responsibly sunsetting them is a good business decision. And it's something that many open source teams and open source program offices do on a regular basis. And sunsetting an open source project should take your users' needs into account wherever possible. And if possible, offer users time to migrate to a replacement technology. But at a minimum, it's important to signal that the project will no longer be maintained, updated, or have security patches so that users know they should no longer be using the project. And this can be accomplished by clearly communicating the decision to sunset the project to any known contributors or users, along with updating the README and other project communication channels and package managers. And then the final step is to formally archive the project as a clear signal that it's no longer going to be maintained or updated. And this guide walks you through all of those steps. Thanks. So, the Demonstrating Value Guide is our most ambitious guide so far, and it is very different from the other guides in the series. So, all of the other guides were designed as getting started guides to help people make quick progress on a topic that maybe they didn't have much experience with. So, as many of you know, demonstrating the value of your open source efforts within your organization can be a real challenge for OSPOs, for other open source teams, to justify the value of this work, this very technical and nuanced work, to your executives and your organizational leadership, so that the open source work can continue over the long periods of time that are needed to sustain open source projects. Open source teams often, unfortunately, default to justifying their work by talking about contributions to open source in ways that sound an awful lot like charity, by talking about how it's good of the community. But this doesn't resonate very well with leadership because it doesn't show a return on investment for employee time. In other cases, open source teams provide an overview of the work done in an open source project using numbers of contributions, maintainers, numbers of commits. However, what this indicates to leadership is that an employee is spending effort, but there still isn't a demonstrated return on the time spent by employees for these open source efforts. So this guide walks through a set of steps, starting with building an open source strategy that supports your organization's goals and explaining how the open source contributions support the goals of the organization can help the executive team understand the strategic importance of this work. The next step is determine which open source projects are most critical for your organization, which also means that it's important to have a software inventory that helps identify those projects. So many organizations are already performing these inventories to evaluate their supply chain risk. So criticality actually dovetails nicely with some of the existing supply chain assessment initiatives. And this is followed by assessing open source project health risk, which is important because you might need to allocate more time from employees to help bring critical projects into a healthier state. And once you have assessed the criticality and project risk, then you need to prioritize your work to stay within the limited resources that you have within your organization. And the final step then is pulling this all together and using it to measure and frame the ways that measure from the value in ways that resonate with the leadership team. And this generally involves a fair amount of storytelling and explaining how the work that you do is important to meet your organization's goals. Next slide, thank you. So here are links to all of the practitioner guides that we've published so far. And we have a few additional guides under development, which you'll be able to find at the link at the bottom as soon as they're published. I also wanted to mention that the guides are MIT licensed and available in the CHAOSS Data Science Working Group repository. So you are welcome to clone them, customize them for your organization, do whatever you want with them. We're also happy to have contributions. So we encourage you to submit pull requests, or if you don't want to submit a pull request, just submit an issue with some details with ideas for how to improve the existing guides. And then we also have an issue template to make it easier to propose new guides. And there's an option to propose a guide that you would like to write, or you can propose a guide that you would like to have that's developed by someone else. And ultimately, these practitioner guides are a resource developed within the CHAOSS community, but we hope that they're useful to a wide variety of individuals and organizations to improve the health and sustainability of their open source efforts. Next slide, please. The CHAOSS project. So Matt mentioned we have loads of people in the Slack workspace, but the CHAOSS project would not be as successful as it has been if it weren't for the people who are doing lots of really important work on the project. There are too many people to name all of them, but here are some of the people that we have in leadership positions who are chairing our working groups, maintaining our software, and running various programs within the CHAOSS community. Next slide. So as you can see from our list of co-chairs and leaders, we have quite a few people participating in the CHAOSS project, and we welcome everyone. So you don't need to do anything or pay anything to join the CHAOSS community. You can just show up and start participating in areas that are interesting for you. So this link takes you to the website where you can get started, and we hope to see some of you around the CHAOSS community. All right, thank you. And we have loads of time for questions.
Excellent. That was absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much, Dawn. Thank you, Matt. So the first question that I have for you before I open the floor up to anyone else is, so you say you want to get people to get involved. When are you out and about? What events will you be at in the near future where people might be able to sort of run into you in person? I mean, for example, Amsterdam?
Indeed, I personally will be at the Open Source Summit in Amsterdam, at least for the Open Source Summit part of it. I'm not staying for
Yes.
the
Yeah.
AI
Okay.
that happens afterwards. But yeah, I'll be around there. And generally you can find, not just me, but loads of other people from the CHAOSS project will be at these events. You can generally find us at Open Source Summits,
Yep.
Linux Foundation member summits. We usually have some people giving talks there. I'm trying to think if there are any, Matt, are there any other events coming up that people are going to be at?
We always run a CHAOSS Con prior to FOSDEM.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we typically run 2 CHAOSS Cons per year, one associated with FOSDEM and one typically associated with SSNA, kind of depending on the timing of when it is.
Plus
Yeah.
CHAOSScon Africa. So we actually do 3. CHAOSScon Africa is organized by a different team. But as Matt mentioned earlier, that one is happening today, actually.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. Right, okay, so throwing the floor open. So if anyone else would like to ask any questions, either just unmute and leap in, or if you want to drop them in the chat, that is another possibility. While we wait for people to think about that, so some other sort of things that occurred to me while you were sort of explaining what you're up to is, have you got any experience of sort of gathering or applying the metrics to inner sourcing programs at all?
So I would say in the CHAOSS project, we have not explicitly in the project, but members who participate in the CHAOSS project do that kind of work. So by extension, I don't know that, Dawn, have we really taken an effort towards inner source?
No, we really haven't within the CHAOSS project itself. However, the folks at Bitergia have done quite a bit with inner source. So Daniel Izquierdo is, I believe, on the inner source board or chair of the board, or he has a formal relationship with the inner source commons. And so a lot of the inner source work kind of happens there as opposed to directly in the CHAOSS.
Okay, now that's really interesting. I mean, I ask from a sort of selfish perspective, because we're working with a client at the moment that's setting up an inner sourcing program, and that's really got a couple of aims. One of them is, you'll be fully familiar with these as a concept, but one of them is really sort of baby steps towards understanding what open source is about, with a view to ultimately, open sourcing what they're doing properly. So I think from that perspective, what you were sort of talking about, the value is really, really interesting. And I think we can use that very helpfully when we have a conversation with the client to help them understand more about the value of open source, the value of open source projects, and why community is very important. But the other thing really is also thinking in terms of developing the inner sourcing program itself, using your findings and your guides in order to help to foster the community help within that program. That's the reason for the question.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things about inner source is that a lot of the metrics that we have within the CHAOSS project probably apply, but in different ways with different interpretations, because they are very different. And you look at some inner source efforts are like the one you described, which is kind of baby steps towards open source. Some inner source efforts are really laser focused on trying to get their business units to collaborate together. And then I remember Wolfgang Gerhardt gave Gehrig gave a presentation that I saw once about inner source. And one of the things that he was talking about was some of their challenges at Mercedes is they're actually, because they're different companies, only certain ones are allowed to participate in the inner source program, because they're not allowed to share data across some of the corporations, because they're actually different legal entities, and there are some legal issues with that. So you get into all of these things that are so different from open source that you also need to take into account. So it's a very different, it's a different environment, but a lot of the data gathering would probably be pretty similar, only you're gathering from private repositories instead of public ones.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. As a matter of interest, I mean, during the process of both gathering and analysing the various types of data that you've got, I mean, what are the sort of most counterintuitive, surprising findings that you've come across? Do you have any of those?
Well, one issue that we come up with regularly is people ask for a red, green kind of yay or nay on a metric.
Yeah.
They just want a definitive answer. on a metric. And I would say that when the CHAOSS project started, we were kind of thinking, yeah, maybe we can do this. But we realized over time, quickly, quickly over time, that you simply can't do that. And to your point,
Hmm.
Andrew, it's like baby steps, or we call it just trying to get people to move off zero. Like, how
Yes.
do you even understand the data that's in front of you? What are the questions that you're trying to answer? So I think that's been one of the biggest learning items for me over time, that there is no metric that can have a solid, you're doing great or you're not doing great kind of answer.
Yeah. Yeah.
All of them require just more investigation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I think
Absolutely.
one of the things that's surprising to a lot of people is that even if you're looking at a single metric and for one project, that metric going up and to the right might be good. In another project, actually going up and to the right might not be. So if you're looking at, for example, a lot of projects look at, new contributors, numbers of new contributors, how many people are coming into
Yeah. Yeah.
that's, an increase in the number of new contributors is fantastic when you have a well-resourced project, lots of maintainers. A whole bunch of new contributors suddenly coming into a project with burnt out maintainers who are barely keeping up as it is not going to be good for the project, right? So even though it's like the same metric going in the same direction, for one project, it can be incredibly destructive, and for another project, it can be really positive. So I think that's something that a lot of people find surprising.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. I mean, are there any particular sort of sources of information that you would sort of be really keen to be able to access that you currently can't?
I would say that so all the chaos software has been pretty focused on gathering data from a defined set of repositories or a defined
Yeah.
set of communities. Um, but what I'm finding, or what I think a lot of us are finding now, and I think Matt can talk more about this, but when you start looking at supply chains, you don't know what those repositories are going to be. And so
Yes.
the idea that you give our software a repository or, a mailing list or a Slack channel or whatever, and it gathers all of the data and then you analyze it. That model doesn't work as well when you're talking about, huge scales and you're talking about, understanding the supply chain. I don't know, Matt, you want to chime in on that?
Yes, this is a very big thing for me right now. Thinking about, I think the way that when I first introduced the CHAOSS project, it was a lot about project by project, just taking a look at the health and
Hmm.
sustainability of a project. But as soon as you ask about the health and sustainability of a supply chain, where there's a series of
Yeah.
connected, either socially connected, technically connected, or socially like you share members, or it's just a technical call, um, or even within, say, ecosystems, like, say, the CNCF, where there may not be technical or social connections between projects, but you're trying to understand the health of a collection of projects overall. This is something that I'm struggling with right now in a good way, to think
Yeah.
about how we think about health and sustainability at scale.
Yeah. Yeah. No, excellent. Thank you.
Did Martin
Martin,
have?
you've turned your video on, you've unmuted, so please join the conversation.
Yeah, thanks. Already put in the chat that I didn't have any questions, but have some homework. But I thought I would ask the obligatory AI stroke LLM question. If you have any thoughts or about how they may help or hinder your activities in the past, in the future, or perhaps how somebody could use an LLM plus your metrics to get some insights, perhaps, which may be not obvious with a huge amount of data you can probably get back in one go. Just wonder if you had any thoughts in that direction.
Yeah, I personally don't do a lot with AI and LLMs because a lot of the work that we do within chaos, you don't really need that kind of analysis. But so the front end to Augur there's a project called 8 Knot, which has been driven by Red Hat, and they actually brought on 2 interns over the summer, and one of them looked at how you can display graphs based on using an LLM based on a question. So I come into Augur 8 Knot and I say, I'm trying to better understand this. And spits out, like 5 graphs that might help me understand that using an LLM. So I think that is a really interesting application for it. And then the other intern was looking more at it from a database standpoint, and so being able to ask kind of natural language questions to construct database queries to pull information out of the database. And it's very constrained. Like there's only certain questions you can ask, and it was a little bit limited because you don't want any random person to be able to ask a database a question because you take down the whole database when they ask something really complex. So it was constrained in a good way. And so those are 2 areas that I think are interesting potentials for that type of technology. There's also significant downsides. A lot of open source projects are struggling with curl in particular. And, Daniel's been pretty vocal about this. Curl in particular has been struggling with just a lot of AI slop that's been submitted that they just don't have time to deal with. So we've got kind of the positive and the negative.
Okay, thanks. Interesting.
I have one comment here too, because I've been thinking about this as well. With respect to organizational diversity, like as open source projects, one of the things that comes up regularly is the amount of diversity within a project. And something that we're starting to investigate is kind of the impact that, say, generative AI might have on business decisions to participate or not participate in open source, and the cascade that might have. Because participating in open source it's complex, like legally and socially and technically. It's a lot of work. And if internal LLMs can solve problems that open source may have been solving prior, I'm personally curious what the decision processes are there, and then the subsequent impacts within open source. I don't know what that looks like, but it feels like it's a dynamic that is going to have some output over time.
Yeah, great question. Excellent. Right, any further questions from the floor? If not, then I can ask if Matt and Dawn have any sort of further points they want to make. If you want to find out any more information about the CHAOSS project, then chaos.community, I think, is the place to go, unless you have a better URL than that. Also, this this will be, I think, made public on YouTube as well. So anyone that's watching this offline, then please get in touch with the project through the contact details through that URL. So any final comments, Matt and Dawn?
No, I would just say that, we, as I mentioned earlier, we would love to have people join us. So, join our Slack channel. We're taking a break from meetings for most of August, actually for all of August, with just 1 or 2 exceptions. So if you look at our calendar and don't see any meetings, look in September, not August. We have loads of working group meetings. Anyone is welcome to pop into any of the meetings that has a topic that you're interested in. And so we really do encourage people just to join us and come hang out. You don't have to be an expert on metrics. A lot of what we talk about in those working group meetings are problems that people have. We talk about, we talk in general, like about, problems with licensing and problems with, funding contributions. And there's just loads of stuff that we talk about. So we're not necessarily talking about how to build individual metrics for things. We're having discussions about the problems that people are having and how they might use metrics to get some more insight into those problems so that they can then resolve them.
Excellent.
Good wrap up. Thanks, Dawn. Thanks for having.
Yeah, thanks for having
Super. Yeah, well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, both of you. That was absolutely great. As you know, I love the work that you're doing, so please carry on. And thank you. I think with that, we can now wrap up. So everyone, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Thanks
Bye,
very
everyone.
much, everyone. Bye.